And I'll take this opportunity to say a little bit about the capo. We use it a lot in bluegrass rhythm guitar. The main reason is that bluegrass relies on the open string sound. And so we tend to play out of positions like G and D and E instead of using barred positions. I'll explain a little more about why this is later. But I'm about to play a song in the key of F, capo on the 3rd fret. A persistent problem for guitar players is the guitar going out of tune when you capo it up. There are ways to minimize this by the way you put the capo on. There are different kinds of capos. This is a spring type, and so place it on, but I want to get this capo as close to the fret as possible and as straight as possible. If you place a capo like this, it's really going to aggravate the tuning problem. So as close to the fret as possible, as straight as possible, and it's never going to be perfect, but it will be better. This is Blinded by the Rose. I saw her lips smile at me, she held me in her clasp. She was a rose among the weeds, no one could break the trance. But if I'd seen beyond the blossom, then I'd turned away. But for the waiting thorn had found its prey. I was blinded by the rose till it was much too late. I didn't know a heart pierced by a thorn was to be my fate, till she left me among the wounded with the pain that grows and grows. I didn't see the thorn, I was blinded by the rose. Again, all the same principles that we used from the basic boom chick and the booma chicka added in and the dynamics all apply in a song like this. While the vocal was happening, it's playing that. And then in between, a song like this is a good song to illustrate the difference between bluegrass and country rhythm and the dynamics involved. If this was being played in a country band, you'd hear rhythm more like this. Nothing wrong with that, it's just that in bluegrass we have the dynamics we talked about, and a little more emphasis on the bass notes. Another type of slow song that we need to discuss is the 3/4 time song, or waltz. Again, we use the same principles, except in this case we have a boom chick chick. So, but the same alternating bass notes. And we have the boom chick chicka. Or the boom chicka chicka. I'd say you could use the same method. I'll give you an example, a song called Angel Band. My lady's sun is sinking fast, my race is nearly run, my strongest trials now are past, my triumph has second line and the end of the fourth line, we had a boom chicka chicka. It's especially important not to make a song like this too busy. It needs to let the vocals stand out. It's a quiet kind of a song. It's a hymn. My lady, if we played it like this, my lady's sun is sinking fast, I think the song has less impact. Now we'll get into a subject that's very popular when we're talking about rhythm guitar, and that is bass runs. To start out, I'm going to play the song we've been doing quite a bit of already, Will You Be Loving Another Man, with bass runs thrown in. I'll hum a little bit of the melody so you know what's going on. So what I played there was a few basic walk-ups. And what I mean by walk-up is using bass runs to walk into the next chord. With in other words, there was a walk-up first to the D, and a walk-up to the C. And then it ended with a G run, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. First of all, though, before we get into the nitty-gritty of these bass runs, I'd like to demonstrate the way to play them with the right hand. This is a very important principle that a lot of guitar players miss. It's something called a rest stroke. Sounds like a swimming move, but it isn't. It's a term I just recently learned. I've been doing this. I didn't know what it was called, but what they mean by rest is the fact that the pick rests on the next string. Instead of the free stroke that we have in the boom chick, the pick is resting on the next string. So think of it as just falling down and taking its rest on the next string. So what's important about this is that this makes those bass notes, those bass runs, punch out in the rhythm. So here's how it would sound like without doing that. This has a lot more impact. So every note of this bass run is a rest stroke and a down stroke. So we have and the same with the walk up to the C. Take a while to practice that if you're not familiar with it, because it is something you'll really need to use. You may find yourself orienting your right hand a little differently when playing that rest stroke, more the way you would have your right hand when playing lead. So in playing rhythm and using this technique, we go back and forth from the free hand of the boom chick to the more constricted, to make that bass note sound the way it should. So I would say just take some time and experiment with the different ways to walk up and down to the chords. Familiarize yourself with the scales, and you'll find you'll come up with your own run variations, but I've shown you a couple of basic ones there. With bass runs, just like with the strum variations, they shouldn't be used all the time, particularly when the vocals are going on. If you heard when I sang East Virginia Blues, I played very little while I was singing, added more in the instrumental section. An important embellishment to know about, in addition to bass runs, is alternating bass notes within the bass strum pattern. What I'm talking about is something like this. So in other words, instead of the 1, 5, 1, 5, we're substituting 1, 3, 6, 5, 1, 3, 4, 5. This is something that's been used for a long time, even before bluegrass music and early country music. To give you an example of this, Charlie Monroe loved to play this. That 1, 3, 6, 5 pattern. This is a technique that's very useful when playing backup to fiddle tunes. We played Sally Gooden a little while ago, and Sally Gooden has an awful lot of time spent on the one chord. So we have, remember, this can get just a little bit tedious, and the fiddle wants a little bit to spice up the backup. And then if you add a run to that, you've got good fiddle tune backup. One small note is that when doing that run, you can also use your little finger. I changed positions, but well, it also depends on how you're playing your G chord. But again, practice those alternating bass notes. They apply more in the key of G than to other keys, just because of the way the hand is positioned. In the key of C, you'll find you end up getting too high. But there are still variations that can be used. Key of D is a little trickier. But still, in every key, there are ways to vary your bass note pattern. Now, these aren't bass runs, and I don't recommend the rest stroke because you really need to keep that loose rhythm pattern going. Now, getting back to the original example about bass runs, you remember that I threw a G run in at the end. Now, the G run is something that a lot of you may know how to play in principle. There are a lot of guitar players out there, even some that play professionally, that really don't have a very good handle on how to execute the G run. I think one of the reasons for this is not understanding the rest stroke principle, and also not understanding that the most important thing about the G run is the last two notes. So we'll talk a little bit about the mechanics of the G run. Here's an example. That is our basic G run. And I like to separate the parts of it to help you execute it better. This is the first part, and there are many different ways to play it, but in this case I'm playing it with a double hammer-on. And this is a rest stroke, followed by an upstroke on the D note. So, again, all rest strokes and almost all downstrokes except for this little up on the D string. Now the second part is this. This is sometimes played with a pull-off, or sometimes it's played without one. In either case, you need to lift your middle finger up. Otherwise you get this. So, first part, and then if you practice these two individually, I think you'll find when you come to bring them together, you'll have a good G run. Now, just like bass runs, G runs have an incredible number of variations. You wouldn't think they would, but they sound similar, but they can be very different. To give you an example, I can play this without that double hammer-on. I can play with an upstroke, or with with a slide. There are a lot of different ways to play it, but the big payoff is the last two notes. In fact, sometimes when listening to old Platt and Scruggs records, you'll hear Lester punch out those last two notes. You won't hear anything else. And so I recommend even trying it without, just to get those right. One problem that some people have with the G run is just getting it started, because it requires an interruption of the rhythm. So we have the place for the G run. Then be loving another man. When we have that word man, the rhythm stops and our bass note becomes the first note of the G run. And then get your hand ready to play a bunch of rest strokes. Then be loving another man. And I should talk about the appropriate place for a G run. The G run really is a space filler, and most bluegrass songs have that space in them. We played Long Journey Home a little while ago. Lost all my money but a $2 bill, $2 bill, $2 bill. Lost all my money but a $2 bill. I'm on my long journey home. There was no place for that before that song because the song took up the space. Lost all my money but a $2 bill. It wouldn't work there. $2 bill, boys, $2 bill. Lost all my money but a $2 bill. I'm on my long journey home. There are some songs that have a space for a G run in the middle of the verse. I'll give you an example. I think I'll go across the ocean if I don't change the notion. I've got to forget you if I can. And then it's the second half. I'm feeling so blue, I don't know what to do, for I'm head over heels in love with you. Now you may choose to put a G run in that middle space, or you may not want to put one in there. But it's really up to you. You could put a strum fill in that section. At the end of the verse, though, the classic bluegrass way is to have that G run in there. And it's good to practice it and get used to doing it just about every time in that place. I'll give you another song as an example. This is called I'm Lonesome Without You. We were young, we loved each other more than anyone will know. But that day you found a new love, and you said I had to go. Here it is without that run in the middle. When we were young, we loved each other more than anyone will know. But that day you found a new love, and you said I had to go. Sounds like it belongs right at the end. Now you might ask if the G run can be transposed into other keys, and the answer is yes it can, especially to the D chord. If we play in the key of D, a little while ago we played East Virginia Blues. I was born in East Virginia, North Carolina I did go. There I met a fair young maiden, and her name I did not know. It's exactly the same run, except that it starts on the 6th string, or low E. off notes are, you might want to practice that variation. Some people will play it in C. The problem with the G run in C is that your final note sounds a little bit wimpy because it's on this B string. Works better as part of a lead break, but as rhythm, just doesn't quite have the same feel to it. So I tend to steer away from playing it in the key of C. And then playing it in closed positions also doesn't really sound the same. If you were in A, one of the reasons that the capo was so popular in bluegrass is to maintain that open string sound for the G run, either in the key of G or the key of D. Now you may wonder if a G run can be played in a slow song or a 3/4 time song. Well, not exactly, but there are variations on the G run that are used in slow songs. You can hear this especially in the playing of Jimmy Martin. Here's an example. That's 3/4 time. That's like a G run. It's just modified to fit 3/4 time. Boom, chick, chick, boom, chick, pop, pop. And that's just, and if you play a G like this, all played with your first finger. If you play a G like